My name is Mark, and you're listening to Zen Talk. The topic is why Buddhism? So, we need to discuss what exactly is Buddhism. A lot of people have many different ideas, some of them wrong, some of them kind of in the ballpark. However, in this discussion, we are going to look at Buddhism as the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And those are, in my opinion, the two core elements of what it is to be a Buddhist. Now, Buddhism is a religion in that there is a belief of a spiritual or soul ascension. And we will get into that in a bit. I am well aware of the controversy that some Western philosophers and theologians have stated that Buddhism does not believe in a soul. This is actually not true. That is more of a nihilistic or an atheistic view of Buddhism. Or there is a channel out there, I believe, that is devoted to the more atheist view of Buddhism and looks at Buddhism as just a meditation technique. Buddhism really consists primarily of the belief of the Four Noble Truths. And this just isn't just knowing them or memorizing them. This is an absolute belief that the Four Noble Truths are in everything that possibly can ever exist. So everything that has existed, everything that currently existed, and everything that could exist or in the future will exist. So this is the heart and soul of Buddhism, and something that is required of a Buddhist to believe in order to say, well, I'm a Buddhist. Because if you're saying you're a Buddhist, it means you believe in the Four Noble Truths. So let's talk about the Noble Truths, and I'm going to read out of my book what these come down to. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Simply put, if you exist, you know you are suffering. Even a god knows that one day they will die, just as the stars grow cold and wither away, and galaxies unravel and become nothing but cosmic dust. In this, knowing you exist is suffering. And that's really what it comes to. It's not just the fact of the decay, the old age, the unraveling of the elements or the nuclear elements or the quark elements or whatever it is, how far deep you want to go down the rabbit hole on that. It is more the fact that you know that there is something that knows that you are going to die. That you are born, that you will grow old, that what you have will wither away, and that you will die. That is the truth of suffering. So the second of the Four Noble Truths is the cause of suffering. Now, this is the mental anguish of knowing one's own existence that creates the wants and desires. The want of more life, the desire of happiness and peace and comfort. It can also be the want of, not having a war, the want of not harm, the want of not suffering, and the desires that come with that. And it is ever so subtle, even in the desire to not want to die, not want others to die, and the longing of not being alone is enough to keep the cycle of rebirth going. And by rebirth, this is getting into the theology of karma, which is what Buddhism borrows from the Brahma religions, is that the energies and the you could call them psychic energies, you could call them soul energies or spiritual energies. That is the genesis of rebirth, the genesis of materialism, the genesis of creation. in that particular idea. And in kind of a weird way, you could almost say that wants and desires brings up the genesis of creator gods or deities or entities, in of where physical matter is transformed into conscious matter, and thus these bodies and the mind that goes along with it. Now you would think, well, if I think, therefore what is that? And it is not to confuse the spiritual, which moves the body, versus the animal mind that knows the body is moving. All right, so the truth of the end of suffering. So to put out a fire, you simply extinguish it. The same principles are applied in the aspect of suffering, in that one extinguishes the wants and desires that fuel the suffering. With fire, removing the fuel, such as the air or the heat, will extinguish it. Sakyamuni, which is the Buddha of this world and this time, taught a means of extinguishing suffering that leads to the last of the Noble Truths. And the last of the Noble Truths is the true path that leads to the end of suffering. And in the West, we call this the Eightfold Path, and you may also hear it as the Path in 8 parts. This path is the most interesting in that one is to invest wholeheartedly in a devout faith and belief in the Four Noble Truths, but more so, a disposition of character that is invigorating, empowering, and a mind that is vigilant against false teachings that can lead one astray, yet the mind is a strong resolve to penetrate the deep meaning of the Four Noble Truths. So this is what we mean by the Four Noble Truths. It is the cause and the remedy. So let's get into the next part of being a Buddhist, is the Eightfold Path. And I'll again read from my book here on the Eightfold Path. So the first aspect of the Eightfold Path, or the Path in 8 parts, and this is not necessarily, this could be a linear progression, this could also be all at once. It just depends on you. The first part is the Noble View, which is sometimes called right view. And this is basically this pertains to the proper understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And the original Pali translates to, and what, monks, is right view? Knowledge of suffering, knowledge of the cause of suffering, knowledge of the cessation of suffering, and knowledge of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. This, O monks, is called right view. Now, it is imperative that the disciple fully understand that the Four Noble Truths and accept them, just as the belief in karma and rebirth is essential to becoming a disciple of the Buddha. Knowing and believing in the Four Noble Truths is essential. All right, the second part of the Eightfold Path is the noble aspiration, or the right resolve. And again, this is pertaining to the heart of the Four Noble Truths, and that one resolved to end suffering and find liberation, sometimes called emancipation or ascension. And in Pali it translates to, and what, monks, is the right intention? The intention of renunciation, the intention of ill will, the intention of not harming. This, monks, is called the right intention. And this, it is pointing to a faith, an aspect within the initiate, that the teachings are true and that they will work for them, and given enough time of practice, that is. Also within the statement is when we say the intention of renunciation, it means that you're kind of giving up the world at large. You're giving up the chasing of fame and fortune. You're giving up the chasing of a big family. You're giving up all of these, the chasings within what we would call everyday life. And the intention of non-ill will and not harming is more pertaining to the Four Noble Truths again. You're not going to be harming, or you're not going to have ill will towards them. You're not going to be mad, for example, that suffering exists, or have ill will towards the cessation of suffering. So sometimes this gets misconstrued into moralistic kinds of talk, but it's none of that. This is really, again, towards the Four Noble Truths. All right, so the next is the Noble Doctrine, or what's called right speech. So many people, including monks, mix the teachings of the Buddha with their own worldly ways and inadvertently cause heresy. And you see this all the time with a lot of the Indian gurus and other psychologists and those people that who claim to be analysts or into the mental health field. They kind of create a hodgepodge of the Buddhist teachings with their own ideas, with ideas from other religions. You also have a lot of non-Buddhist persons who conjecture the Buddhist teachings to be something they absolutely are not. You see this all the time in universities and other institutions in where people who have an Asian or Buddhist studies degree. It's a theology degree or a divinity degree with a focus on Asian studies. They kind of interpret Buddhism from their own religious beliefs, be it Christian or Judaism or Islam or even that of atheism. So what does the Buddha say about this? And this is how it goes. And what, O monks, is right doctrine? It is refraining from false doctrine, refraining from the divisive doctrine, refraining from the harsh doctrine, refraining from idle chatter. This, O monks, is called right doctrine. This is the doctrine, again, of the Four Noble Truths. And when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, it's basically instructing us to not listen or to not give credit to people or teachings that will teach that the Four Noble Truths mean something else. So the teachings of Buddha are profound and liberating and insightful. This often brings up jealousness in people who wish to own these teachings for themselves. This part of the Eightfold Path reminds us to not create false teachings. And you will find this out there, that there are people that are jealous of the Buddha, and they will start mimicking these words as if they said them. And it often doesn't take too much time to kind of read books and realize, oh, this person is just plagiarizing from something else, or they're just saying, they're what's called a 3-inch roshi, is that what they hear comes right out of their mouth, 3 inches. All right, the next one is the Noble Transcendence, or the right conduct. And again, this applies to the Four Noble Truths. And I'll read from the Pali again. And what, O monks, is right action? Refraining from killing living beings, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. This, O monk, is called right conduct. We need to kind of look at this in the context of where is this coming from? I mean, why would this be said? To kill living beings. And this is the belief that all living beings can find the peace of Buddha or the Buddha's path. So we're mostly talking about sentient beings. That would be humans. It could also be animals that have sentient living. This also gets into thought. To not kill one's mind, to not kill one's own thinking or own thoughts. Because a lot of times you'll also hear, or you can read in the Buddhist sutras, that the sentient beings, or the sattvas, are also your own thoughts, your own mentation. All right, next up is the noble transcendence, the right conduct. And this is again pertaining to the transcendence from the Four Noble Truths. And let's go back to the Pali, in where it is stated, "And what, O monks, is right action? It is refraining from killing living beings, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. This, monks, is called right conduct." And this is the path of relinquishing worldly ways and desires as to achieve the transcendent tranquility from suffering. It's also worth noting that right conduct is about refraining from vice, that being actions that are considered immoral, wicked, or criminal. Though some take a more literal and absolute stance when it comes to right conduct, generally how one ultimately interprets right conduct is left up to the individual. As for myself, I take the view that if what you are doing is creating suffering for yourself and others, then it is likely not right conduct. The noble conjoinment of spirit, or right livelihood. So again, within the view of the Four Noble Truths, we'll go back to the Pali. And what, monks, is right conjoinment? Oh, here, monks, is the noble disciple gives up wrong conjoinment, or abides by right conjoinment. This, O monks, is called conjoinment. This is a bit cryptic, and this is like, well, what is this really talking about? Right livelihood. It kind of comes from right conduct, as into do not do wicked and evil things that involve harming or things like trading weapons, trafficking in animals, dealing in intoxicants and poisons, or engaging in deceitful practices. Basically, what this is kind of saying is that in right conjoinment, you are doing things that create harmony and happiness and a joy within others. This part of the Eightfold Path reminds the disciple to abide in the ways that promote right conduct, as taught by the Buddhist lore, that involves such things as abstaining from occupations that involve the harming of living beings, the trading of weapons or objects of war, the traffic of animals for slaughter, and this also includes the trafficking of humans, and the dealing with intoxicants and poisons, and the engaging in deceitful practices. So this is where one is promoted to do things, whether it be for a living or for money or for whatever reasons, that actually engage in right conduct, where you're not creating suffering for others or yourself. Okay, the next one is the noble motivation, or right effort. And again, it pertains to, that's right, the Four Noble Truths. The right effort is the motivation to not get caught up in worldly ways or the temptations and the defilements of the world. So let's go back to the Pali. And what, O monks, is right motivation? Here, monks, a monk generates desire, makes an effort, arouses energy, exerts his mind to prevent the arising of unarisen evils and unwholesome qualities. He generates and makes an effort to arouse energies and exerts his mind to abandon arisen evil, unwholesome qualities. He generates desires, makes an effort, arouses energy, exerts his mind to cultivate arisen wholesome qualities. He generates desire, makes an effort, arouses energy, and exerts his mind to maintain and increase arisen wholesome qualities and to bring them to full development. This, O monk, is called the right motivation. So again, we're going back to right conduct, but this is more of the internal world of right conduct, whereas the noble conjoinment of spirit, or right livelihood, is the external, Now we're going into the eternal world of right conduct, of the mindset, which is to abandon those things that create suffering, or those ideas or mentations that promote suffering, and develop those that alleviate and bring happiness and joy. So in other religious paths, this might be known as motivational prayer, the mustering up of inner strength to resist temptations or to fall into evil ways, to endure hardships, and for the one's own spiritual salvation. And this is something where, yes, you can go, if you're poor, you can go steal a loaf of bread and eat, but you're being tempted to fall into evil and wicked ways. Sometimes it's just easier to go up to the shop owner and say, hey, I haven't eaten in a day or two. Can you help me out? And they give you. And that gives them the opportunity of giving. And the joy of them giving is far better than the wickedness of you stealing. So in this part of the Eightfold Path can be interpreted to disassociate with those that engage in immoral and unwholesome qualities. Okay, so the next one is noble disposition, or right mindfulness, which is getting more into the quality and the character of mind. And let's go back to the Pali. Hear, O monks, a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent and clearly comprehending and mindful, having removed consciousness and displeasure in regard to the world. He dwells contemplating feelings in feelings, ardently, clearly comprehending and mindful, having removed convertedness and displeasure in regard to the world. He dwells contemplating in the mind, ardently and clearly comprehending and mindful, having removed convertedness and displeasure in the world. He dwells contemplating phenomena in phenomena, ardently, clearly comprehending and mindful, having removed consciousness and displeasure in regard to the world. This, old monks, is called noble disposition. And if you're paying attention, this really sounds like meditation. And this is more or less what it is talking about. The disposition of one's character is vital in the disciple to maintain, in which the character defects and bad habits often lead to becoming astray in the Buddhist teachings. Whereas engaging in worldly ways, creating heresy and suffering for oneself and others. So what we have here is this is not the close your eyes and trance out meditation. This is the meditation of getting into, let's go back up here and look at your mind within your own mind, or contemplating your body in the body. So what is the body? So the body is looking at the body. The feelings are looking at the feelings. Contemplating mind is looking at the mind. This is basically the critical examination, or the Socratic interrogation method, in where you're critically asking yourself, what is it that is looking and seeing, and what is it that is acting and doing? This noble disposition, or right mindfulness, is the heart and soul of Buddhist meditation. All right, so the last of it is the noble absorption into unity, or the right concentration. And this is really just getting into the emancipation or the ascension aspect of Buddhism. We'll go back to the Pali. And what, O monks, is the noble absorption into unity? Here, monks, a monk secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with joy and pleasure born of seclusion. With subsiding of thought and examination, he enters and dwells in the second jhana, which is the eternal serenity of mind, the single pointedness of mind, without thought or examination, with the joy and pleasure born of concentration. With the fading away of joy, he dwells in equanimity, mindful and fully aware, experiencing pleasure with the body. He enters and dwells in the third jhana, which of the Noble One declares he is equanimous and mindful and dwelling in pleasure. With the abandon of pleasures and pain, with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, he enters and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to the equanimity. This, old monks, is called right concentration. This, monks, is the Noble Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of suffering. Clearly, the noble absorption into unity is the kind of the objective of the Eightfold Path, and with all the other previous positions being supportive as well as essential to this objective. And if you're paying attention, you're seeing that this is a ascension, a liberation from the suffering of the worldly ways. The noble absorption of unity can be controversial in that it is clearly that it is pointing towards a liberation or ascension. Though Western scholars claim that Buddhism does not teach the soul, it's that it doesn't teach the Christian soul. And that is the big difference, is that in Buddhism, especially within the last part of the Eightfold Path, we are talking about the mind of the jhana, or the third and fourth jhana, in where something is being liberated from the world of suffering. And what is that? Well, in English, it translates to the soul, which is that energy that moves your arms and legs. It's the energy of the mind that looks at the mind. It's the energy of the feelings that look at the feelings. So when we go to the right disposition, or the right mindfulness, the seventh part of the Eightfold Path, we really start to see that there is something looking at something. There is something noticing something. There is the mind within the mind. And this is where we are getting into learning of the soul, and then we liberate the soul in the eighth part of the Eightfold Path. And that is the Buddhist path. Buddhism believes in ascended beings. These are known as bodhisattvas or Maha Bodhisattvas. These are the great Buddhas from time immortal, from the many worlds. These were, a lot of times, these beings were once humans who ascended to a higher spiritual dimension, and they interact with our existence to provide assistance and help towards one's own enlightenment and emancipation from the suffering worlds, or what's called saha, which means the world of suffering. So this is a takeoff from the Pali version. And in the Pali Suttas, once the disciple liberates the soul, that's it. They leave the world of suffering altogether. They're gone. They don't come back. But the Bodhisattva, which is the Mahayana edition, or the Mahayana version of Buddhism, is that the great beings who are just one step away from totally leaving the Saha world, or the world of suffering, turns around and provides assistance to those who have yet to emancipate themselves from the world of suffering. So in short, they are saving all of us. They become saviors. They become, the person that reaches their hand down to pull you out of the sea of suffering to the boat or to the dry land. So believers do pray to the bodhisattvas for divine intervention, especially those in hardship or those that are really struggling. And you will see in Asian countries shrines and various religious sites devout to one or another or all the bodhisattvas and the Buddhas, because there's also believed that there's the Buddha of the past, the Buddha of the current world, which is Shakyamuni, and then the Buddha of the next world, which is Maitreya. Okay, so within talking about why Buddhism, and especially within the Western context, there's a lot of questioning of, well, then what is all of this chanting and meditation and all of these things that Buddhists do? What's all that about? So the chanting and mantras are primarily a devotional activity performed by the monks and devout laymen. This is often done to ground one's own mind in a core aspect of the Buddhist teachings, to muster up faith and the energies of self-transformation to ascension. That's it. That is why these are done. It's a very individualistic practice. It is one that you can do alone or with others. And it is done to muster up one's own faith and to ground your own mind in a core aspect of the teaching. Now in Pali, especially with the Theravadins, the chanting may be of a sutra or parts of a sutra. In prior generations, the Theravada monks would chant almost non-stop to not only memorize but drill within them entire volumes of dissertations. So this was, again, it's done to ground one's mind. It's also done to just totally, towards the energies of self-transformation. So let's talk about meditation, because a lot of times when you say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, and people just tack meditation right onto it. But Buddhist meditation, as I mentioned earlier, is really part of the seventh stage or the seventh aspect of the Eightfold Path, which is the focusing on mindfulness or of spiritual matters or of spirituality. But Buddhism can also use a process of mindfulness within rituals that are used to focus the mind on spiritual matters rather than mundane ones. Mindfulness is also known as meditation in the West and is a method of being in the here and now and seeing reality as it truly is. And this is really getting into, again, like in the Eightfold Path, the mind looking at the mind, or the body looking at the body, or the feeling looking at the feeling. This is where we're going with this. It has nothing to do with blissing or trancing out or falling into some dreamy world. This is really about focusing on the spiritual matters than the mundane ones. You're focusing on one's own liberation from suffering rather than how am I going to make money or something that would be considered that of the world. All right, so a lot of times people will see Buddhists praying at statues or at pictures or long elaborate ceremonies to the Buddhas of the past and the Bodhisattvas. And they say, oh, well, you're praying to Buddha or you're worshiping idols. And it can look like that. And sometimes Buddhists mistake it for that. But it's not really that at all. Buddhism can come from a form of ancestor worship especially from cultures that are deep into the ancestors and really honoring of those that came before them, especially that of the Buddha and those who taught Buddhism. And they're honored and celebrated in very elaborate and formal ceremonies. This is a reverence of mind to impress upon oneself those who are initiates to the importance of the Buddhist teachings. Western culture doesn't really have an ancestor worship culture. So in the West, we have really downplayed ancestor worship. Here we see it, as President's Day, as Mother's and Father's Day. It's more of just it's an honoring of the parents, honoring of the founders, honoring of those that have came before us. Though in Asian cultures, especially you find in Buddhism, you find a much more stronger reverence and honoring of the teachers, of the ancestors, especially in Japan, where temples are inherited, and that is usually vast tracts of land and properties and buildings. And to not honor and thank your ancestors would kind of be the unfamily thing to do. So you also see it in America, where the wealthy and those that have lands and holdings will have pictures of their relatives on the wall. And that is a version of honoring ancestors. So it depends on culture to culture how that looks. In Buddhism, it is often used to, like I said, to impress upon oneself and those who are initiates the importance of the Buddhist teachings. So I think this is the last slide. And we're getting now into kind of the more interesting aspects and modern aspects of Buddhism, which is Buddhist dispensationalism. And it's a belief or view that the teachings are in graduated stages, with the prior stages being abandoned. And you see this in Christianity, and where this word is sort of developed, dispensationalist. And it is a belief that the teachings are like from one way to the other, or from one stage to the other. And that what you think is true at a lower level is to be abandoned at a higher level. Buddhist dispensationalism leads to all the various sects and schools that we see today, from the Theravadins to the Tibetans to the Chan and Zen schools, and even the various Pure Land schools that exist. These are all dispensationalist views that many people hold and they have taught. You can go read the teachings of Nichiren. You can go read the teachings of Dogen. You can go read the teachings of Rinzai, known as Lin Chi. You can go read the Sixth Patriarch. You can go read Bodhidharma. You can go read any number of Tibetan teachers. All of them have a dispensationalist view. And this is something that eventually I came to recognize, that all of these sects, all these different ideas were based upon graduated views, and with the prior views being abandoned to what they currently believe now. Okay, so I think this is the last slide. The bhikkhu, which is kind of an important part of Buddhism, and I'm going to put it out there right now that there really is no set definition of what a bhikkhu is. One can read the Pali Suttas and even into some of the Mahayana sutras, and you get an idea of the mindset and the activities of a bhikkhu, but it's not necessarily that says it has to be precisely one way or the other. So the bhikkhu can be male or female. Doesn't necessarily mean one has to identify as male or female, but they make no distinction. Generally, when the suttas read he or him, it's just the way the things were translated. It can read people or person, they or them. It's not really important at this point. But the bhikkhu really comes to the one that devotes themselves to the pursuit of Buddha's enlightenment. That's a bhikkhu. And you don't have to go to Thailand or Korea or one of these Asian countries to be a bhikkhu. You don't have to shave your head. You don't have to wear robes. It's really your own devotion to this pursuit. That's it. So this is also considered the easy mode to obtaining liberation from the world of rebirth and suffering. And a lot of times this is because the bhikkhu gives up chasing of worldly ways. They give up, making money and having the big house and living the worldly life. And I think we all know people that, they're not really all that interested in those things anyway. So they kind of have what we call the monk mindset. But when one truly embraces this mind, the mind of the bhikkhu, and truly gives up chasing worldly ways, then they find themselves with nothing but the pursuit of the Buddha's enlightenment. And things become a lot easier. Things become a lot faster. You can really get into the 7th and 8th stages of the Eightfold Path pretty quick. So, just so that I want to make it clear that the bhikkhu is not a priest. They may, because they are that devout, or they may be in a religious order, and they may be supported by laymen who, maybe they're not people who are not as serious, but they have the money to support they're doing it for merit or for their own reasons. A bhikkhu could be asked to lead a congregation or to, focus on ceremonies because, if you got nothing else to do, you can focus on ceremonies. They can look like they're priests. They can look like they're teachers, but they're not. So the bhikkhu is not a layman. The bhikkhu is not somebody that is actively fathering or mothering children. They are not people that are seeking to run businesses or to make money or to build houses or anything like that. And in some countries, the bhikkhu is just a wandering mendicant. In other countries, like here in the West, they're people that do what they have to do to get by, but they're not really too interested in making tons of money or having large houses or fathering or mothering lots of children. So the bhikkhus are also not doctorial. They may read the suttas and sutras, but they're not considered as experts or as absolute of the Buddhist laws. Though a bhikkhu may have studied the sutras, they are not the final authority on the sutras. Only you are, because if you can read the sutras yourself, then you can make up your own mind. And lastly, the bhikkhus they're not teachers. There's nothing in the suttas or sutras that puts them as teachers of laymen or of anybody, really. Though because they may have time to read the suttas and suttas, and therefore laymen would turn to them for questions and advice based upon their readings. It doesn't necessarily make them a teacher or anything like that. Okay, so that ends my presentation on why Buddhism. My intent was to dispel a lot of bad ideas and myths about Buddhism, putting the focus more on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. All right, well, I thank you for listening to my ramblings here and my thoughts about Buddhism. If you like what you hear, please click the subscribe button and like this video. And so have a great day.